All right, we're going to get started. We got at least our first group of people ready to go. So welcome everybody to the Life Aid Voice Project Town Hall on the ABCs to Bridging the Gap. We're going to start off. We just had a retreat this past week in Colorado Springs. So we had an important announcement, and to help us kick that off, I'd like to welcome Boyd Melson, West Point class of 03, and one of the Voice Project's volunteer leaders. He helps co-lead these town halls, and he has a special introduction he's going to make. So Boyd, take it away.
Thank you for having me here. My introduction to start off with, we would like to say that we now, as of, was it probably during the actual retreat we just had, became official. We have formed a partnership with USA Boxing, and that is very dear to me, as I used to sit on the board of USA Boxing as and I was under Team USA for 4 years, and I boxed on the world team in 05. So that means a great, cool having that, bringing it back full circle. And so we have Mike McAtee, and Mike McAtee is the executive director. He's running the show day to day for USA Boxing, and we're honored to have him here. And then with him, we have Tyson Lee, and Tyson, who's a fellow West Point graduate, class of 94, is running chair of the board of directors for USA Boxing. So we're happy to have you guys, and please feel free to share some words.
Thanks so much for having us. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Boyd.
So Mike, if you could just talk a little bit about why USA Boxing is endorsing and partnering with the Life Aid Voice Project, and introduce Tyson, and I hopefully Coach Lev is on.
Excellent. Thanks, Sean, and Boyd, thanks, and everybody who's on this call. It's an honor and privilege to be associated with this group. Initially, Boyd reached out to our membership director, Lynette Smith, who's been with USA Boxing since about 2005, and she told me about Boyd when he was in the WCAP program and was on our board, and said there wasn't a better person, and if he was behind this project, it was going to win. So, and Lynette, when she speaks, you listen. So it was a great opportunity. I jumped on a call early. My background, when I was listening to General Casey and everybody else on the call, it was like, this is a natural fit. A little bit about myself, and then I'll let Tyson talk. But I started boxing as a kid at the age of 12. One of my boxing coaches was a police sergeant, would come into the gym and had a great interaction with all us boxers. At the time, I didn't realize I was an at-risk kid. My parents were divorced. I was helping raise my little sister, and boxing saved my life. What it also did, it gave me a career. So not only I was an average boxer, like most of our 34,000 boxers in USA Boxing, coming from areas and at-risk youth. But it gave me goals, kept me off the streets on Thursday, Friday, Saturday nights. And then I was fortunate enough to be hired by the Lawrence, Kansas Police Department. I retired after 25 years as a police detective. Retired June 24th of 2016, and my first day with USA Boxing was June 26, 2016. So, and I said law enforcement was the best career you could have, and I will tell you, because you're serving the community, but being part of USA Boxing and giving back, our coaches, officials save and change lives. So we were very fortunate that we had board change that started in March of 2019, and our nominating governance committee selected Tyson Lee as one of our independent directors, and then also Chris Trombetta, who is an independent director and also a West Point grad, Eric Buller, who's on our board, is also a West Point grad. And then we have another independent director, Dick Hoffman, who's a Naval Academy grad and retired SEAL. So having a partnership with law enforcement, the military, and USA Boxing, and everybody on this board, it's in my belief, it's a win-win for everyone. So we're just fortunate to be part of the program. So Tyson, I'll turn it over to you, and we can go from there.
Well, thanks, Mike. You just about said it all about us being excited about being part of this project. Thanks again for having us. My background, I graduated at West Point in '94, and why do I love boxing? Well, if anybody that's ever come through the academy, or if you know much about the academy, you can't go there and not box. That's going to be one of your athletic events that you have to do. So I ended up boxing intramurals. Did really well there, and I ended up fighting in the Brigade Open. I never won the Brigade Open. I took second to a guy with about 100 fights, and I had about 10, intramural fights. But it was a really good. We got a standing ovation in the Brigade Open, and the fuse was lit for me. I think from that point forward. When I graduated, I was a branch detail infantry in MI, and that's military intelligence. And I went to Ranger School, Airborne School, did all that, served in the 82nd, commanded in the 25th. And when I was an S2 and a company commander, I ended up fighting for the Hawaii State Championship, and I ended up winning it 3 years in a row. So I got to travel with the Hawaii team and see what boxing could really do for the young men. And it was young men at the time. I don't think we had a bunch of female fighters, but now, you see what we can do for the young men and the women. And it really changed my life, because one of the things I wanted to do was win a state championship. I never won one in football, never won one in basketball in high school. And, out as a young lieutenant, Ranger qualified paratrooper, I won a state championship fighting for the fighting in the Hawaii program. And I'm telling you, when you get to see what it can do for people, and for me, it did a big thing it really was a big confidence booster for me. And it really exposed me to some things. And 20 years went by, I went out, I had kids, got out of the military, started some businesses that, did well. And I spent 20 years raising my kids. And so they grew up and they're out doing their thing, and we're very, very proud of them. And then I saw an opportunity to become a part of a board with boxing. So I put my paperwork in. About eight months went by, and I thought it was pretty much gone. And I got a call, and as fate will have it, I was selected. And then there were some changes that came down from the USOPC that said one of the independents had to be president. And I was like, wow, it's a big job. So I threw my hat in the ring, ended up winning, and here we are. So I was very fortunate to have a great team of directors, a great staff, and sometimes things just fall very well for you. So I'm lucky to be working with Mike and the staff in Colorado Springs, and just very proud to represent these members, these men and women, who are going to go to our elite program, our Olympic team, and represent us in Olympic Games, and also all the way down to our grassroots level that change people's lives every day, which is what we're talking about today. So thank you for what you're doing. We're excited to be on board, and we're going to do whatever we can to support you.
Thank you both very much. And I'll say on a side note, I forgot to share that with Eric Buller. I've been very close with him now for 15 years. So I have that relationship. And Tyson, when I was asleep, I knocked out the captain of the boxing team in the finals of the state open.
There you go.
So is Coach Level on the call yet,
Nope.
John?
I pinged him, but he's probably busy with his group. So we're going to jump in because a couple of the panelists have tight timelines. So first off, I want to just go through the guidelines. Session is scheduled to last till 6:30. Almost every session we've had has lasted longer than that. We'll just kind of play it by ear. All the audience members, if you could please, whoops, someone hit their wrong, turn off your presenting button there. All audience members, if you could please hit mute right now, except for the 5 panelists, I'd appreciate it. all speakers try to keep your remarks in, to a minute, minute and a half, so we can keep the flow going. All questions from the audience, if you have questions or you have comments, please type them into the chat box, and we'll try to get to them, as many of them as possible. This is a nonpartisan, trying to find common ground, so no political statements. This is a positive, respectful dialogue on how to improve our community by being more kind and civil to those you don't know. And we will remove any disruptive participants. So I appreciate your cooperation, and we're going to get started. America is a great country, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, but it takes hard work, sacrifice, and accountability. As a country, we have not always lived up to that promise. And today we're going to follow up from our last town hall, which was walk a mile in someone's shoes, as we discuss the ABCs to bridging the gap to strengthen and improve our communities. Just keep in mind, what is a real experience to a speaker on the call is real to them, even if you've not had that same experience. So some of the things you're going to hear you may not agree with. They might make you angry, shock you, make you cry. But we're trying to have a frank discussion, and we're going to get a little bit out of our comfort zone. Please understand that we are here to listen. God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, and we'll try to use those proportionally. And we're here to find positive solutions, common ground, and understanding of our differences. We don't necessarily need to agree on everything, but we have to have a basic respect and understanding for each other if we're going to have a civilized nation. With that, we're going to get started. I'd like to introduce our first panelist. I'm going to ask a question, and then if you could please introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your background for everybody that may or may not know you, that would be great. Our first speaker is Andre Taylor, founder of Not This Time. So Andre, I'm really excited about having you. Let me turn my phone off because it's blowing up. So what I would like to ask you, Andre, is what was the biggest challenge and the biggest hurdle in the work that you did in passing the police accountability initiative in Washington State? And if you could kind of talk a little bit about your work there, take it away, Andre Taylor.
Yes, thank you. My name is Andre Taylor. I'm the executive director and founder of Not This Time. Not This Time is a grassroots organization that led Washington State in 2018 in becoming the first state with a police accountability law. We did that by bringing law enforcement together with politicians, with community, and with unions. Let me answer this question about, in order to have built what is called here in Washington State the largest people of color coalition in the history of the state of Washington, one of the hardest things to do when I was going to separate communities like Asian Pacific Islanders, Native tribes. You might not know that there are more Native tribes in Washington State than there exist in the whole United States. The cultural sensitivity part is probably the hardest thing. In building such a large movement, without cultural sensitivity, you can't do it. Let me give you a perfect illustration. There was a young Native woman named Renee Davis that was killed up here. She was having a mental health crisis, and there was a phone call made for her well-being, and she ended up being killed in front of her children. I thought, how horrible is that? And I felt like my organization should do a fundraiser for the children that were left. And it's fortunate that my organization is filled with everybody. My organization looks like America. There was a Native woman in my organization that says you cannot do a fundraiser for Renee. I was like, why not? She said, because in Native culture, you can't mention the name of a Native person for at least a year. And see, me feeling that I was going to do something wonderful would have been absolutely offensive to the Native population. And this is why I'm talking about the cultural sensitivity part, where you have to sit down and you have to learn and be open to other people's culture where you don't offend. And so I think that in building the movement that we built, that part is essential. And every time someone calls me from around the country, I highlight that part probably more than anything, because unless you get past that, it's going to be virtually impossible for you to build some type of unison and unity. My organization represents families of people that have been killed, not just by law enforcement, but just by other citizens. And one of these citizens' name was Horace Lorenzo Anderson. And his special needs 19-year-old son was killed at a place called CHOP here in Seattle, Washington, that was very popular going around the country. CHOP was an area that people organized, and they took 6 blocks of a particular area here in Seattle. And violence started to occur. And when he called me, the father, I went down there and I addressed CHOP. And I told them, I said, you guys started this CHOP thing because of the death of George Floyd. But here it is that this young man, special needs child, lost his life, and you're not saying anything about it. And I refuse to allow you to get away with that. And so there was a lot of commotion. Ultimately, the mayor shut down CHOP. And Sean Hannity reached out to myself about going on his show with Horace, talking about his son. It was probably one of the most moving moments in television. After that show, the president called me, and he was extremely gracious, talking to Horace about his son and saying the son is looking down on him, he's proud of him, and offered his condolences, just very gracious. And I appreciated the president for doing so, because he didn't have to do that. He has also invited us to the White House, and we're slated to go the first part of next week to be able to continue these conversations. And I'm excited to be able to go and have this platform with the president to speak about some of the work we've done here in Washington State and how I believe in some of his policies and his historic policies on the Next Step Act that he hasn't gotten enough credit for, that has brought 7,000 people home from the 94 crime bill that Biden and Clinton was responsible for, that separated families. And for the president to do this historic First Step Act that actually brought 7,000 people home, 92% African Americans. I want to make sure that more people of color understand the work that the president has done, and I want to support that. So that's just a little bit about what's going on now. I'm excited to be a part of this conversation. I haven't been in the military, but my life feels like it, all the challenges that I've had to overcome, life and death circumstances. But I'm just so happy that the Most High God is gracious on me, that I could share my story of redemption to young people from around this country, and I often try to do so as often as I can to let people know in the Black community that are struggling that you don't have to be defined by your past or by a mistake, and I am the living example of that. I've been married 22 years. I have a son that graduated Yale and a daughter that graduated UCLA, another daughter that's married to a military man, and I am the success story of where you can come from the streets and change your life, all the way from the streets to communicating and talking to the president. That's an incredible story, and I think that is a story that I can impact a lot of people who are struggling in our communities. So
Thank you so much, Andre.
I'm just going to stop
I have
right
to
there.
say, I didn't see initially the segment on on Sean Hannity, but one of my friends did and said, "You got to watch this." It was the most incredible television I've ever witnessed, and I reached out to you right away, and I was shocked at how fast you wrote me back. And I think police accountability, as we dive into it today, is a really important topic, and having some kind of a national standard will help improve a lot of the issues that we have, and what you did in Washington State is a great foundation for moving forward. So thank you for that work. With us today, I'm truly blessed and honored
Thank you.
to have her back again, Dr. Alveda King, Martin Luther King's niece. I think a historical context when it comes to police accountability and policing and community, and she's done great work in the faith community and in criminal justice reform, which you talked about, Andre. So I'd like to introduce Dr. Alveda King.
Thank you, John and Andre. Thank you for your remarks. The remarks at the beginning when the gentleman was talking about the boxing and the Native American, all of that. So hard, just touches my heart. I watched that interview that you're referring to, Andre, and I'm kind of tough. I've lived through a lot of things, and I'm not a weepy kind of a person and all of that. But I was moved, and I just felt so strongly with that. It's incredible. It touched my heart. And John is so right about saying this is not political. This is not who ought to do this or who ought to do that. It's just these are things that are from the heart. They're compassionate issues. And thinking about faith, family, and freedom. And that looks different from all types of people. I get questions lately. I get a lot of questions about what do you believe and what are you for and what are you against? I said, I'm for humanity and I'm for dignity for all human beings. I see us as one human race, not separate races. And as a human family of one blood, we all have certain things that we need and desire. What does faith, family, and freedom look like? Well, it just depends. And the point made on culture is so important because in some cultures, what we find to be acceptable is something that will not be accepted in other cultures. So we have to have that sensitivity. That's very important. As the niece of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., my dad, Reverend A.D. King, his brother, granddaddy, big mama, all of them, the ancestors that are gone on before. I noticed one thing I do want to put out, along with police accountability, having a safe community, but an accountable and compassionate community. I wanted to mention, John, and I think it's phenomenal that you're bringing these groups together. I wish I could spend even more time and take a bigger role, but to even just be included means so much to me. Congressman John Lewis died a few days ago, and on the same day, another warrior, C.T. Vivian, died. Now, when I was on Fox News and all of that, I said, well, certainly I want to give greatest respect to Congressman Lewis. I said, however, how could we overlook CT because he doesn't have the bandwidth or his name is not as big or something like that? And then they were saying, well, we should rename Edmund Pettus Bridge to the John Lewis Bridge. And I said, well, there were other people on the bridge that day. My dad was beat on that bridge, A.D. King that day, Hosea Williams, several were. I said, so Freedom Pathway or Justice Bridge or something like that, and certainly giving great attention to John Lewis. But when you look at humanity, no person is an island. We all live together, work together. We're one blood. We're not separate races. That's socially engineered. We are one human race, but ethnically, we have different ethnicities with cultural distinctions, and that's important. But for people of faith, and everybody says, well, are you afraid to say Jesus? Absolutely not. Jesus is my Lord. But people of faith, people who believe in God, even the atheist who says the atheist doesn't believe in God, that's kind of a faith in itself. The faith is to prove I don't believe in God. That's another faith, you know. But if we continue to live with compassion, love each other, regard each other, we're going along on this journey. And that is so very important. So I just wanted to say how important these discussions are, and that I ask that God will bless us as we continue to work together. I think in the days of my uncle and my dad and granddaddy, they called it the beloved community. I think that is still relevant today. The veterans and those who have fought to defend and protect our country, that's so
faith,
very
whether
important.
you believe in God or
And,
believe in
I'm
religion,
just
there's
glad to be
still
a
faith,
part.
and it's
Thank you
about
so
purpose.
much.
It's about your inner belief system, and that's your core. And hopefully, you know, we preach that a lot in our program, that, you know, hope and purpose, you know, keeps you going. So we love having you, and we'll take as much time, as much of your time as you'll let us. The historical perspective you bring to this discussion is unsurpassed. So thank you very much. Also with us today, we're blessed to have some high level,
Thank you.
leading edge police departments that are really trying to do accountability and how police can serve their communities better. So I'd like to introduce Tarek McGuire from the Arlington, Texas Police Department. And as you introduce yourself, Tarek, my question to you is, how do we improve policing? And will accountability build trust with the communities that the police serve?
Well, first of all, John, let me just take a moment just to say thank you. Thank you for this introduction, and also thank you for what your group or your nonprofit Life Aid is doing across this nation. A lot of times people say, I want to thank law enforcement for the service that they provide to our communities, but I also thank those that serve our military nationally and abroad to keep our nation safe. I also want to just say to the distinguished panel members, it's an honor to sit here today and have a discussion that I believe that is so relevant, so timely, to talk about the challenges that we face across our nation, not only in policing, but as it relates to building community resiliency and health. I will tell you that each person has shared their story. For myself, I'm a deputy police chief at the Arlington Police Department. And I have been there going on my 18th year now. I take pride in what I do, serving the community. And I've dedicated my entire adult life to law enforcement. And I'm a national advocate for improving community police relations. John, I will tell you that some of the most difficult moments in my career have been facing death. It's very difficult to respond to a call for service or a critical incident where an officer has lost their life at the hands of a violent felon, or not only a violent felon, maybe in a vehicular crash. It's very difficult to walk to that wife or those children and communicate to them that their loved one has died and passed away. It's also very difficult to look a mother, a family member in the face and say that your child or your family member has just been killed by the hands of law enforcement. And so here we are at another point or intersection that I feel like we were at several years ago when President Obama was in office, and we looked at what happened in Ferguson, Missouri, and officer-involved shootings across the country that caused pause in our nation. And most recently, as you talked about a few weeks ago, about the George Floyd incident, where we saw an officer kneel upon his neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds that led to his death. It has caused us pause, and it has caused us to have a conversation I believe that we should be having on a daily basis and an ongoing basis. Because when you talk about community trust, when you talk about bridging the gap, when you talk about belief in the police, and you talk about accountability, all of these words are just slogans if we're not actively working together to work toward sustainable problem solving, to where not only our police departments better, but also that our communities are better. Dr. King just talked about what happened in Selma, Alabama, and I'll be in Selma in a couple of weeks. But she talked about what happened in Selma on the day that we all recognize as Bloody Sunday. And if you look at that situation and think about the lessons learned from that situation, you had protesters on one side of the bridge who were advocating not only for voters' rights, but civil rights. And then you also had on the other side of the bridge, Alabama state troopers who thought that they were standing up for what the law represented at that time. And we saw chaos, but we also saw resiliency, and we saw changes in laws, and we also saw national legislation. And so I think it's very important when we talk about what accountability is and what it looks like in law enforcement and community. It's also important to understand that people see these different issues through different lenses. If you are a black male and you're walking down the street and you've been stopped by the police and you've been victim to excessive force, you may not be able to codify that information or explain it as it relates to what data and science says, but you also may be able to relate that experience to what that person felt at that particular time. And so I think that as we move forward pacifically, as we look at all the national conversations and discussions that are currently out there as it relates to police, and answering the question, how do we bridge the gap and what does accountability look like? I think those decisions have to be rooted in science. I think it has to be rooted in data. And I think it has to, those two things have to play a huge part in how we move forward in changing any system, process, and or laws. And finally, I think it's very important to understand that we, the police, need to listen to the community. A lot of times that we think we know what the community wants, but we have to be able to walk inside the room and sit down and have an uncomfortable conversation, and then come together with an action plan to move forward that involves building trust, that involves everything that these gentlemen just got through talking about, because they help us address crime issues in communities. We cannot police our way out of problems. We cannot over-enforce the law, and we cannot occupy communities. But those that have boxing programs and after-school programs also help our young people stay off the street. And that is what helps build community police relations. That type of accountability helps build resiliency. And then finally, I will say this, if we have those that are in policing who do not represent what the oath that I took over almost 18 years ago, to honor, serve, and protect the community and treat everyone with fundamental fairness and decency and respect, regardless if you are violating the law or not. There are times that police have to use force, but that does not mean that that force needs to be excessive. When we root our actions in that, and we're able to fire officers who do not represent that, then I believe that we are accountable on all levels, and then we can move the needle forward in the direction that we need to put it in.
Excellent.
So,
thank you so much, Derek.
again, thank you, and
really,
I look forward to
had
this
some
discussion.
great discussions with you.
And as
that we'll
Andre
get
said,
into
I'll
some of
stop
that
right
stuff
there.
in a minute, especially when we talk about data. Next, we have Susan Hudson. She's the president of the National Association of Oversight of Law Enforcement. And Susan, as you talk about yourself and your organization and give an introduction, my question to you is, with the most recent protests and rioting, what is the state of community policing, and what does community policing mean to you? Yep.
Okay, well, thank you, John. And can you hear me okay? Okay, great. As John said, I'm Susan Hudson. I'm the president of the National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement, or NACOLE, and that's N as in Nancy, ACOLE.org, if you want to look into that more. I'm also on the President's Advisory Board for the International Law Enforcement Auditors Association, or ILEA, and that's ILEAA.org if you want to learn more about that. But my regular day job is to be the police monitor for the city of New Orleans. And, this is the major leagues of police oversight. This was a very troubled police department, had a fractious relationship with its community, and had earned its way into a federal consent decree many years ago. I was at the Los Angeles Police Department before New Orleans, and in Austin as well before that. And the one thing I can tell you is that civilian oversight of law enforcement is important. When we talk about the platform that your organization has put together, which talks about community trust, which talks about independent investigations, standards for policing, so on and so forth, we're going to be able to talk about what we do in this profession to aid in all those, in that exact platform that you're talking about there. But as Tarek said, as others have said, effective policing is built on community trust. And you find out whether or not your community trusts you based on what happens in situations like the George Floyd incident. And what we found out with the uprisings that are going on all over the country is that there is little community trust. Because, as Tarek mentioned, there's not a lot of community input in how policing occurs. So both as a member of NACOL, as the police monitor in New Orleans, and in all the work I do, I advocate for democratic policing. And that is that our community makes the priorities and direction for policing, gets to weigh in on the standards for policing, and should even be involved in all the accountability processes within a city or within a jurisdiction. That's my theory of helping to make policing more trustworthy in our community. And we think that civilian oversight of law enforcement is a big part of that. We sit outside of the police departments a lot of times. We can sometimes conduct independent investigations, but most importantly, we are a conduit between police and the community. And we do that on a regular basis in all the cities that I've been in. And we really just relish that because a lot of our member institutions are actually charged with helping to build trust in police departments. And we do that by making sure that the community is listened to, by making sure officers are held accountable, and that democratic policing is the order of the day. All right, John, so to answer your question, community trust, where in the state are we right now? Well, number one, I think it's very hopeful. We are having real discussions about policing right now, uncomfortable discussions, and we are talking about the history and the systemic issues in our criminal justice system, including in policing. So that's all important. And we're recognizing things that a few years ago was just really in academia. And now it's all on all of our tongues, systemic racism and the inequalities within the system. So I think, number one, that's great. We're having these conversations. Number two, our NACOL, our national association, we have had over 100 cities reach out to us in the last just couple of months saying they want oversight. They want more control or input in their police departments, and they want it through this oversight mechanism. So people are feeling empowered to do something. And when you have platforms like the one that you're putting out there, you give people action items that they can go to their local legislature and say, these are the things I want done. I want to help. I want things done. But people don't always know what to ask for in this specialized field. So when we have platforms like this where we can educate the community, give them points that make sense, talking points for them that make sense, and action items that make sense for them, I think that's better for all. So I think we're in a good state. I think everybody's understanding that there has to be change, but now we cannot lose this momentum. We have to follow through with it, and we have to make these changes that will make us.
Thank you very much. I think that you bring up some good points. And one of the things I'll point out,
and so I hope I answered your
as
question.
A veterans organization, we serve veterans, military veterans, first responders, National Guard. There's civilian oversight of all the armed forces. All the armed forces are run by civilians. And so the idea of civilian oversight of police is totally in line with that. And so I think that's a really good point. We'll get into more of those details. But one thing I can tell you is as a group of military and veterans, this is just the beginning of our discussion. I mean, you don't leave the battle halfway through. So we're in it to win it, as they say. Next up, we have special guest, last minute pinch hitter for Chief Moore, had to attend a funeral. So we have Assistant Chief Horace Frank. He's the Assistant Chief of Special Operations for the LAPD. The LAPD is one of those police departments that's been under a consent decree in the past. And full disclosure, I live in the city of LA. My brother is a city of LA firefighter. He's the battalion chief. So I'm very tuned in to the inner workings of Los Angeles and the first responder community. So I'd like to welcome you. I'm sure. Do I call you Chief Frank, or what? I'm not sure what the exact title I should call you. All right, Horace. I'll call you Horace. The LAPD is one of the most diverse in terms of the makeup of officers. One of the most diverse.
Well, please call me
cutting
Horace.
edge
That's
in
even
terms
better.
of implementing change and accountability. Chief Moore has led the charge on that. So, as you introduce yourself and you talk about the LAPD, talk about how that accountability and the reforms that you've done, including mandatory body cams, how has that helped build trust in the community and help reduce friction points between the police and the community?
So good afternoon, everyone. And again, I am honored to be part of this discussion, to participate on behalf of Chief Moore. For many people, while it may seem nothing in terms of a big deal, it is a big deal to be considered a pinch hitter for the chief, considering the kind of guy that he is and the standards and the various things that he's got going for him. So again, it's my pleasure. And then again, to be on this panel with some of the esteemed members, Dr. King, I just want you to know that I did see you over the weekend on your interview with Harris Faulkner on Fox Network, and I was absolutely delighted to watch you on that interview. So thank you very much for everything and for what you stand for. With regards to the department being as diverse as it is, I truly believe that we've probably got one of the largest, in terms of being a large police department, one of the most diversified forces in the United States, and I'm very proud of that. I've been with this organization for 32 years. I've risen up the ranks all the way from police officer to the position of assistant chief during this period of time. And I've seen a lot of changes on this organization. We've been through tough times, highs and lows. But even in those moments when we considered while we were going through lows, I saw those, and I think most of us saw those as opportunities to build and to develop into the kind of organization that we are right now. Remember right after the Rodney King civil unrest, when a lot of people were talking about, with all the changes the department's going through, people are going to leave and the department's never going to be the same. Well, there was one thing, the department was absolutely not going to be the same. But the way we saw it, the way I saw it at that time, was that this was going to be a better organization. And in all times of, I guess you can say, strife and in hard times, those are opportunities for us to grow. Those are opportunities for us to get back to our roots with the communities that we serve. Working with communities and recognizing the fact that we as an organization, the only way that we can become better is when we recognize the fact that if we're going to be better, communities have to have a voice. Communities have to be involved in our buildup, right? And recognize also the fact that there's space in this, there's room in this big space for people of various viewpoints. That is something that this organization has always stood, well, not always stood for, but I've seen evolve where this organization has taken the mantle and recognized over the years. Over the last couple of chiefs of police, whether it was Chief Bill Bratton, Chief Charlie Beck, and now Chief Michael Moore, who's just taking things to another level right now. And I'm very proud to be a part of this whole change that we're doing. Cutting edge in terms of body-worn cameras. I remember when this whole topic came up about officers being wearing body-worn cameras on this organization. It was a fight. It really was. Probably the largest police department in the country where we require all our police officers, all our uniform officers in the field to wear body-worn cameras. And it was an absolute fight. But time has gone by. We recognize the importance of body-worn cameras in terms of building trust within our communities, which is an absolute must if we are to continue to improve. If we're to have accountability, if we're to have trust in this organization by communities, we have to be able to step out and not be afraid to step out. within the organization, it was a challenge trying to convince officers that this was the right thing for us to do. So we embarked on this, I want to say about 6-7 years ago, to the point where every uniformed officer working the field in the city of Los Angeles is required to wear a body-worn camera. And it's turned out in many cases, in fact, when we look at the recent unrest here in the city of Los Angeles, and this is just one of the small examples, where those body-worn cameras have been pivotal, have been crucial to us addressing a lot of the issues that we've seen out there. With people who are claiming that officers did things that they did not do, but also on the other side, where we're able to use those cameras to show users training is for officers, there's the things that they should and should not be doing. Accountability and reform. To me, those are two terms. Police accountability is something that we absolutely need. And that's not something that we should be afraid of. We began this years ago with the installation in the city of Los Angeles with us having Board of Police Commission, an independent Board of Police Commission who is actually the head of the organization. Most people don't realize this, but yes, we have a chief of police who's a general manager, but the head of the Los Angeles Police Department is actually the independent Board of Police Commissioners who are civilians appointed by the mayor to head this organization. Now, I will be happy to say that, not every board is the same. But what we've seen over the years, board members who are becoming more and more involved and recognizing their responsibility to lead this organization, where they're not just a pawn for the organization, but rather they're leaders of this organization. And that has been extremely crucial to us over the years. So police accountability is absolutely necessary for us. We think it's a must. That improves this whole discussion that we're having nationally in terms of police and building relationships with communities. But along that point, someone brought up earlier about this whole issue for national strategy. I think we need it. I think we absolutely need it, because when we go out to the communities and we talk about police departments, very few folks are having that discussion about, well, that's the LAPD, and that's NYPD, and that's Chicago PD. No, people are talking about police officers in general. So I remember a couple of weeks ago, Chief Moore was having a speech at the First AME Church in Los Angeles. And he brought up this whole issue about whether police officers here in Los Angeles were actually responsible, or actually whether we had to take some responsibility for a lot of the national dialogue surrounding the George Floyd death. And he said, yes, we do. And people were outraged. They were upset. Well, no, we don't. We don't have any responsibility for what happened in Minneapolis. But that is not the point he was trying to make. The point he was trying to make is that as law enforcement, not just as LAPD officers, but as law enforcement community, we have a responsibility. We do have a responsibility to in terms of what happens out there, hence the need for that national strategy, because no one is going to bifurcate us by departments. Rather, they're going to be looking at us as law enforcement in general. So, yes, we do need to have a national strategy.
I figured you did.
And this is a conversation that we
you're
have begun.
You're on that committee that he's on.
We're willing to join any force to continue that conversation. So again, John, I appreciate you having me, and I do know your brother.
That's great. Appreciate that. And now we're going to get into some roundtable discussions among the panelists and also some of the participants in the audience. It is really important as we are a national organization, having a national police accountability or national police standard is really super important. And that's our mission right now with these calls. We have a task force, police accountability task force, that meets on Fridays. If you want to join us, it's the same link as we used today, and it goes every Friday at noon Pacific. So with that, I'm going to bring back Andre for a second. One of the big issues that you hear about, and when you talk about police accountability or police reform, is the standard of police use of force that ends in death. And I want to start with the bill in Washington and how that changed the standard. When we hear a lot about implied immunity, a lot of people don't understand what that means. But I wanted to get the discussion rolling with you on specifically the language that was used in that initiative and how they created a new standard of good faith and used that as an objective standard by which it was determined if a reasonable officer in a similar situation would have believed that deadly force was necessary. if you could please speak about that, because I think that's a good foundation for how we can move forward.
Yeah, most people don't know that Washington State had the worst law in the nation on police accountability. There was something in the language of our law that no other state has, and it was called malice. In order for us to hold a police officer accountable, we had to prove that an officer had malice, which means we had to prove what he was thinking in his mind at the time of the act, which is virtually impossible. So over 35 years, there's not been one officer in the state of Washington that had ever been held accountable for unjustified deadly shooting. Initiative 940 first eliminated that malice in our law. And we also changed that good faith standard from subjective into objective. In other words, instead of it being in the personal view of how an officer felt the situation, or an officer saying that he felt for his feared for their lives, the good faith objective standard brought in the circumstances, right? We couldn't even get there because malice was a de facto immunity in our law. You had to get past malice, and you couldn't get past malice, so there could never be any type of, looking at the circumstances. One of the most high-profile cases in Washington State was a native carver named John T. Williams. This was in 2010. An officer named M. Burke shot him within 4 seconds, and he was very known in the community. Law enforcement found that M. Burke violated police policy, but because of the malice clause in our law, we still, in such an egregious case like that, could not hold M. Burke accountable. And so that was one of our primary things, to make sure that we changed that statute and then made it a good faith standard. Also within our law, we made rendering first aid a law. And many states are over the country, rendering first aid is not a law. You don't have to render first aid as an officer. So we made it a law. In my brother's case, which brought me back here in 2016, law enforcement shot my brother and held long guns over him and allowed him to bleed out for over 8 minutes. So in an egregious case like that, we want to make sure that, even in that rare instance, that officers are making sure that they are rendering first aid. We don't want a situation to come that somebody thinks somebody is a criminal or what have you and feel like, let the asshole die or whatever. We want to make sure that, that people are rendering first aid. So also mental health crises training is a big one. A third of people that are killed by law enforcement are people experiencing a mental health crisis. And there's a lot of us personally that know somebody in our families that have some issues, some mental health crises issues going on. And a lot of families are afraid because they know the data speaks that a third of those that are having these situations are being killed. And it's not fair for officers not to have this specific kind of training. So we want to make sure that officers have this specific type of training so that they can understand the difference between someone that's in a crisis and someone who's not, right? So, and we also had de-escalating. De-escalation is very, very important in that a lot of times, in a lot of these cases, they're being escalated instead of de-escalated. So now you can be held accountable. Sorry guys, if you're not de-escalating the situation. The beautiful thing about what we did is that it involved the Fraternal Order of Police. They came on board and supported us. They asked us something that we decided to give them for their participation. Their ask was, if an officer goes through a trial and he's found not guilty, if the state can take care of his charges. And I felt that was fair. I said, of course, I think that's fair. and they came on board with that negotiation. We also had WASPEX and WALCOPS. Those are three of the largest police unions in our state. All came on board to support Initiative 940. So as far as having something similar that we can bring forth around the state, I think there's a lot of support for it. And I already send it to the president's people because I think it's something that we can build upon. That has already shown that it has support from law enforcement. And that's what we want to do. We want to show that we can bring community together with law enforcement. Our tagline was building bridges between community and law enforcement. And that's exactly what we did. And we want to make sure that they are an intricate part of the conversation as we move forward, because it's necessary,
Thank
you
you.
know, to have that immediate,
I
somebody
especially,
that's an
when
in-between
we,
person.
as a military veterans organization,
that could be
everybody who
able
signs
to
up for the military
bridge
signs
this
up
gap
for the
that we've
Uniform
had
Code of
far too
Military
long.
Justice.
And
And
I
that's a
think
national
Initiative
standard that
940 is a great
everybody
start for us
has
to be able to
to
do that.
adhere to. And that's where, as a veterans group, in the discussions with the veterans, they really felt like a national standard of policing. And there's a number of the guys on the call today, Adam Bailey and Overton Nash, and some of the guys that we had that discussion with, really an important part. First aid, obviously, if you're helping the community, we had a discussion in Colorado Springs at our town hall about how if the fire department shows up, everybody's happy because they're there to help. And when the police show up, everybody's scared because they think they did something wrong. And if police had we're doing first aid, that helps build trust. So anyway, thank you, Andre, and we look forward to hearing more. Boyd, I'll throw it to you.
Yes, this question is for Tarek initially, after I was listening to what you had shared, but Mr. Frank Horace, you could answer in on this too. So I know what the ABCs we have here, A being accountability and C being community engagement. We believe that there's a commitment from police enforcement to be involved with the community, to be accountable to the community by being involved with them. What authorities, in your positions, would you have so that if an event was going on within the community, law enforcement would show up to participate? I would imagine off the bat, people who don't have any issues with people in their community would be happy to go, but it's more for the people that have issues because they haven't been exposed that we're directing this towards. What authorities would you have, please?
So I apologize, can everyone hear me? Thank you. So just to comment on that, I think that first of all, your law enforcement agency, when you talk about policing philosophy, it must be rooted in community police relations. We absolutely know that every single day we have to earn the right to police the communities that we live in. But I think as an organization, your community philosophy as it relates to engaging the community should be rooted in community police relations. And so as an example, in the city of Arlington, we work up on the geographical policing model. That geographic policing model means that there are a set amount of officers that are dispersed to communities that they police every single day, which is known as patrol beats. And they have an expectation through their performance metrics as police officers to not only engage those communities while they're on their beat, but also they are acknowledged for what they do when they're off duty. And so we have a plethora of programs where we engage communities, more so communities that are socioeconomically challenged, that we respond to when there are challenges all the time, maybe with violence or maybe with some type of other issues where people don't trust the police have happened. But what we saw is that our greatest opportunity is engaging youth in our communities. And by engaging youth in non-traditional approaches outside of sports and including sports has been very key in us being able to build public and community trust. So I would say it's very important that the police organization in their philosophy has an expectation that officers will engage the community in traditional and non-traditional approaches. And then the third thing is, it's important that we show up when something bad is not going on, right? And I say this as an example. There's an area where we've had some crime challenges going on for the last month in the city of Arlington. This Saturday, we will be out walking the block in a safe manner, just to provide information to engage the community in a good fashion. So it's when you talk about people being afraid of the police, in my personal opinion, we show up as an occupying force when something is going bad. But to identify in your strategy as it relates to engaging the community when things are not going good is, I think, where you gain community trust. And so I also want to say that we take for granted, right, that, this is what we've done. And we've checked all the boxes. Building trust in communities is not about checking the boxes. It's about building what those relationships are. And guess what? In a relationship, when you've done something wrong, you say, hey, we made a mistake. I did something wrong. And that's where you begin to repair what that conversation and discussion is. And to me, that's when you're incorporating the philosophies that the community expects, because in many cases, they want the police to admit that this incident did not go how it was supposed to go. The officer did not act in a correct manner, and this is what we're doing to repair it. That goes a long way in my experience in incorporating that in your community philosophy and engaging the community. And that's what works to build trust.
Yes. Hi. So thank you, Boyd, for that question. So if I understand you, Boyd, you talked about what is our, I guess, our involvement in terms of the kind of community that we can actually attend. So, there are a lot of things in the communities in terms of programs that our officers actually are part of that they have the ability to attend. There's National Night Out, which is an annual program involving various aspects of communities that our officers are heavily involved with. The Summer Nights Lights program, one that is geared towards the gang members, quote unquote gang members in the communities, in terms of our ability to try to get them involved in alternative activity as opposed to the gang activities. But I think what's important to understand is that we don't just wait for these programs to occur for us to go there, right? We try to create our own opportunities. And we do that in so many other ways. And, we've got our cadet program, which we've got over 4,000 members of youth who are involved in our cadet program within the department. We have soccer programs. We have tutoring programs that we do, that our officers do. And this is throughout the entire 21 years throughout the city of Los Angeles. We do read-alongs where we have our officers go to the library and meet with kids after school or during those breaks to conduct reading programs with them. We have the Watts Bears, which is geared towards a lot of the sports events in those communities. So there are a lot of these. One of the things that we also have in terms of programs that we have developed and work with communities to develop, and that I'd like to really talk about, is our Community Safety Partnership Program. All right, this is a program that was established back in 2011 in partnership with the Los Angeles Police, a partnership between the Los Angeles Police Department and the City of Los Angeles Housing Authority. At its inception, the program began with 4 teams, of about 40 sworn officers in 3 or 4 of our housing developments. And since then, it has actually expanded now, where we actually have 9, and I'm going to call them CSP, Community Safety Partnership. We have 9 sites throughout the city of Los Angeles, and we're looking to expand that. In 2015, then President Barack Obama recognized the success of this program in terms of building with individuals and using alternative policing methods for ability to successfully address crime and quality of life issues in these particular communities. So this is one of the programs that we're heavily involved with. Our current chief of police, Mike Moore, is very much committed to this program, and now we're at the point where this is not just a program, but rather it's a goal that we're trying to inculcate within the DNA of the Los Angeles Police Department. This is a program that was once run by a commander, and just in an effort to show our commitment, this program is now at the head of this program, or the head of this initiative, is now a deputy chief, who's a direct report to the chief of police. So this is something that we look to expand beyond those 9 areas and rather now throughout the entire 21 years throughout the LAPD. We've got terrific partnership with the Balmer Foundation. They provide significant funding for this program, for this initiative, again, with the LAPD and the community and the housing development. So those are some of the things that we're involved in. And again, not just attending or going to those things that the community would invite us to, but really try to create our own opportunities for this partnership with communities.
Last question for you, Horace, and thank you for that, Chief. The target audience, I'm wondering, is young people in the community, especially of color, aged 20 to 30, who don't have children of their own. So when you have the community engagement, when you're interacting with children and you'd have their parents there, they would be excluded from that. And then in addition, I would imagine that crime rate amongst people with children is much less than those who don't have children, and that would be those usually between 20s and 30s. So what mechanisms do you have to have your law enforcement learn that audience that they help serve?
So it's important. This is not just targeting people 20 to 30, because when we go to these housing developments, when we go to these areas, I would not say that the target is people 20 to 30s. It's all ages, right? Because they're all impacted, not just the individuals who may be actively involved in gangs that are being impacted, but we've also got to consider the other people that live in those developments. And a lot of times those are kids. We've seen recently about the kids that are being victimized in some of these horrendous crimes that are occurring. So we're not just targeting that 20 to 30s, that age group of folks that we believe to be gang members, but rather everyone within those communities. Again, when we look at some of the programs that we've got that we're involved in, the cadet programs, the Watts Bears program, these are all kids. The reading programs, these are all kids that we really are emphasizing, focusing on at the grassroots level, and then we're working our way up because it's just something from a holistic standpoint that we have to address.
Boy, can I add something real quickly? I think Susan pointed this out earlier, and Horace continues to kind of hit on it. I think when we look at the crime challenges that we look in our communities, number one, we have to be able to listen. Number two, we have to be able to take a holistic approach to the issue. So I give an example. We have a program in Arlington called Mentoring Arlington Youth. And this particular program does focus on juveniles probably between the ages of 12 to 14 years of age. And some of these kids are high performing kids, but then some of the youth that are in the program are low performing, or they're involved in crime and criminal behavior. And so when we began to look at why are they failing in class, well, we understood that the reason why they're failing in class is because their mother is trying to identify if she's going to pay the electric bill or is she going to buy food for the evening. Or when you look at a young man maybe stealing shoes or fighting or beating someone up, it's because he's embarrassed to come to school because he doesn't have what he deems in his mind shoes to wear to school, right? And so when we're able to, whether it's police and community coming together to meet what these needs are that are affecting particular communities, then we've seen in Arlington a reduction in crime by trying to address the other socioeconomic factors outside of the crime problem, if that makes sense. So it takes a holistic approach to engage communities. And then I will say this, when you talk about events and showing up for events in neighborhoods and communities when it's unpopular, when they see us doing those types of things, and this doesn't always get noted, and it's great stories, but when you see officers
to follow up
that
on
are paying
that,
electric bills and
Tarek,
buying shoes
in the weeks to
and
come, in
working
the
with
next
other
week or the
corporate
next 2
sponsors
weeks,
to
we hope
meet
to
the
have
needs
a
of those
group of
communities,
business leaders to
then
talk
you
about
see their
economic
parents
opportunity
have a change in
and what
attitude
that means
in law
for the
enforcement,
community
and
and
now
how
we're addressing
economic
generational issues
opportunity
that are associated with
helps
crime.
improve relationships between the community and the police for many of the things that you just talked about. So we're looking forward to that, furthering that discussion. So thanks for bringing that up. Susan, I want to get you in here real quick. In all the work that you're doing, what was the single most important factor? You heard Andre talk about the bill in Washington. So talk a little bit about the work you're doing on accountability, and what do you think are the most important components of accountability?
I would say it's one of the core tenets of civilian oversight altogether. One of the most important issues is transparency. For a lot of years, just you didn't know what was going on in these cases. And especially in the city of New Orleans, there was not information being given out. And when I was at LAPD at the time, there was a ruling by the California Supreme Court, which even media agencies not to be able to get information about what happened in officer-involved shootings or other misconduct incidents. So there was just a shield or over officer using violence, and then also over their misconduct investigations. And so one of the most important things that we did here, or that we do in oversight, is to shed light on that, to open that up, make it transparent, to provide data about it. For instance, a few years ago, we did a report about there were 1,500 uses of force in the New Orleans Police Department, and one was found to be out of policy or to be inappropriate. That's that, you know, once we shed light on that, those numbers started creeping up a little bit as we moved on from there, so that more, you know, they were looking more critically at force and within the department and adjudicating it in a more critical manner. Body-worn camera video. We were some of the first to put it out there, our oversight agency. And so now we're seeing, and we're seeing police departments embrace this around the country, which is to get the information out there sooner rather than later. But we helped to usher that in New Orleans. And, you know, you see what happens if you wait too long to put out information or put out video. I think we saw some things in Chicago around Laquan McDonald, and that video coming out later, and it having been, you know, so much secrecy surrounding it that when the community did hear about it, they were super upset. And that just destroyed any trust there was in the Chicago Police Department. But I think it was pretty minimal anyways, that trust. But transparency is one of the most important issues. And one of the things we're pushing on now is data, policing data. Communities pay for policing. It's some of the most expensive part of our community's tax bill. So what are you getting for that? And so more data about what goes on in policing, and to help community make
Transparency is
its
huge.
decisions
And you
about
mentioned
what our
data, and we're
policing
going to get into
priorities
that a
for
little
them.
bit.
Is it
We're going to
stop and
probably
frisk,
run out
or
of
is it
time, but I want
responding
to
to calls
talk
for
about data
service?
in a second.
Is it having more
Because
police or having
Carrick and I
more
had a long
mental health
conversation
services,
about
or
data and the
having more
importance of
services
data,
for
and we do a
children?
lot
So
with data in terms of brain health
those are the
in our
transparency
program,
is
and
the
so I'm
most
a big
important
data
part.
analytics kind of guy, and I think there's some really great stuff you can do with data that will help better, because and when we talk about ABCs, the B is for better preparation, and using data and data analytics will help better prepare police to do their job and serve their community. So we'll get into that in a second. But I wanted to bring in, we had this event. We have a lot of people talking about kids and how we're trying to understand kids. And some people posted some things in the chat thing. So I want to bring in some of the people that were involved in the event that we did in Colorado Springs. Coach Charles Levette was Boyd Melson's boxing coach. He runs a gym and a program in the city of Colorado Springs that is one of the most amazing things. I'm hoping that through our partnership with Mike and Tyson, we're able to replicate what we did in Colorado Springs, other places. I also want to bring in Lee Rouson, Super Bowl, two-time Super Bowl champion. Unfortunately, he was on the Giants, which is one of the worst teams in the NFL. We have to all have our pennants. I like to tease Lee, because you never know how good you have it until you get traded to Cleveland. We'll bring in him, and then also we have with us Mike Haynes, also a Super Bowl champion, voted one of the top 100 players in NFL history as part of the NFL 100 celebration, NFL Hall of Famer. And if you guys just real quick talk a little bit about kids and the programs that we're doing and partnerships and stuff. We'll start with you, Coach Lev. You have to unmute yourself. Hey, Lee, are you there? Okay, talk a little bit about we talk about mentoring and all those things. Talk a little bit about, just real quick, the experience we had in
He was
Colorado
having
and the
challenges
work
for a
that you
bit. It
want to
kept
do
going
with
on and
us.
off with his volume.
Yes, I'm here. Well, my experience at Colorado Springs was just in preparation for all the hard work that's about to get going. So my point is that there were key relationships that were established and built. So we got started. And as far as accountability in the future, I think that there's a trust that's been deposited in everybody's heart that was there. So just to keep it simple, relationships were built. There was trust that was deposited in everybody's heart. So now we can move the chains. We can go down the field and withdraw that trust that's there and
Thanks,
facing
Lee.
all
Coach
the things
Lev.
that we're going to face, because this is not an easy type of thing. This is a cultural changing, life changing, deciding our true identities and our lives and being who we truly are. So it's we got a lot of hard work to go.
Hey, how's it going? Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Hey, like I say, this past is definitely a great experience. I hear one of the things I preach, you all know I talk about, we just got to get back to having the village where everybody is accountable for their actions, whether you know what I'm saying, we hold our kids accountable, we hold adults accountable, and we just have to have that transparency. And I think you all kind of witnessed experienced that this past week with the kids. My youth program we're just, we're in a crawl phase, but, we're not standing in one spot. And, I was listening to Horace and Tariq. I would love to get you guys information, man, because I tried to start the POWER program out here, which is the Police Athletic League. I know it's big in California, and I know it's big in Arlington. I know a couple of those officers that run that. Like I said, we just a splash in the pool out here, but I would definitely like to pick you all's brain to help grow the program that I have out here. And I know with the people behind us with Life Aid, it's gonna be a great thing. I'm just glad to be a part of this movement. And let's
Yeah, we're
hold
gonna
each
have a
other
little discussion,
accountable.
but
Let's
first I
have
want to
that
bring Mike in.
transparency.
Mike,
Let's
you
build
there?
that trust, and we can make the world a better place, one person at a time. Thank you.
Charles, this is Horace, my brother.
Mike
I'd be
Haynes,
more
yes.
than happy to connect with you at the end of this. Absolutely, you can get our information. My
Hey,
information.
so
with
talk a
John.
little bit about sports and how we can use sports. Mike played for the Los Angeles Raiders, and so he's California guy. So
Are you talking about Mike Haynes?
I know we have that event coming up in November. So go ahead.
I'm here. Yeah, I grew up in Los Angeles. One of the families, I should say, one of the many families that left Texas and moved to California back in the 50s. Sorry, Tariq. That was then.
That may have been a good time to leave. I'm sorry.
And it was probably the best thing for our family to leave. But I was kindergarten age, so I didn't know much about what was going on. But my mom and my dad, my stepfather, were looking to start a new life. And my stepfather had grown up in Los Angeles and spent some time in the military. And I guess he had a very good experience in the Air Force, and wanted us to live in California instead of Texas. And so that's, all of my education starts there. And my feelings about brotherly love, my feelings about police officers, and first responders, all that, it started there. And unfortunately, I'd love to say that it stayed great, but it only stayed great maybe the first 10 or 11 years of my life. And then with middle school or junior high school and high school, it was, quite challenging and really needed some leadership, adult leadership, or even older guys, and so I think sports really helped me stay out of trouble. But still, I think my education could have benefited from some of the things that you guys are talking about, doing programs where, people are learning how to set goals, how to achieve goals, how to get along, how to resolve issues without throwing rocks and doing crazy stuff. So, I've been really blessed. I was really fortunate to play sports. Baseball is to be honest with you, was my best sport. But my football career, I guess it was just being in the right place at the right time. Just had a great football career. Got a chance to go to college. Got a chance to do all these things. Play in the National Football League. Play in the Super Bowl. And meet a lot of interesting people. Met the president of the United States, met the governors, met, a lot of super successful people. And I really think that helped me keep on the right path, I should say. I think that really helped, having those kind of people come in. So as a pro athlete, I think we can really play a big role in helping kids, think about things a different way, about leadership. Leadership is not always about being the toughest kid in the neighborhood. It is about making good decisions. And sometimes leadership can be hard. And I think that talking about those things and talking about those times amongst, kids that are maybe a little older than you, or even with older adults, are probably can be very, very effective. So I've been, this is I think my second or third time on call with you guys, and I am just blown away with your commitment to making a difference, and it's really exciting for me to hear how you guys interact and some of the challenges that you've had and how you've overcome them. I love it that you always have a few ladies on here, and today got Dr. King and Susan Hudson, I believe it is.
Thanks, Mike.
I really
I also like to
listening
mention when you talked about
everybody
leadership,
contributing
and
and
that's obviously
and
an
working as
important part of
one. And I think if
accountability.
we
And
can just
we're
continue to
partnering
do
with
this
the
and
Junior
build the momentum
ROTC.
that's already
I don't know
started,
if Daryl
continue it,
is
we
on the
can
call
really do an
today,
awful lot of good things in the country.
but we're going to work with the LA Unified School District for this event in November, Horace. And so I know Gabe's on the call from the Dodgers. And there's a lot of folks. Coach Lev will bring him out to LA, but we're gonna do a big event in November. It'll be 2 days. One will be November 7th, where we'll do some community sports activities, and then on November 10th, we're gonna have one of our walk a mile huddles, and hopefully we're gonna involve the entire school district for LA Unified, and then hopefully even LA County. Like I said, I don't know if Daryl's on the call, but we'll start having some meetings, weekly calls or monthly calls with that, and we'll make sure to invite all you guys if you guys want to participate. And with that, I'm going to throw it over to Boyd.
Thank you again. And Chief Horace Frank, this is for you again, sir, primarily. And then Tarek, I would love to hear what you have to say as well. So when I was at West Point, we had the honor code, and there was an accountability aspect to it. A cadet will not lie, cheat, steal, nor tolerate those who do. That toleration clause is what really made it it was highly impactful, because everybody understood there that if they lied, cheated, or stole, and somebody else was watching them and was aware of it, if that person didn't turn you in, they would face the same punishment as you. So with that being the case, the officers who are in charge of us always trusted what we said, because they knew we were policing ourselves. So my question here, especially for you, Chief Frank, is with you helping lead the charge with body cams being mandatory, what would you see the benefit of having, and would you get behind having, where not only do I have to have mine on, but if my partner doesn't have his on, I face the same punishment as he would face or she would face, so that we're both accountable. And because it keeps us safe to have it on, it helps us do our job better.
So I think you actually just hit on something that is very important, and that is the ability for us to police ourselves, right? And that goes to the whole issue of us, holding each other accountable, holding our partners accountable. Would I support stuff like that? Absolutely, I'd support it. It goes to the whole crux of an officer seeing another officer engage in misconduct or violating department policy, and their responsibility to, first of all, stop it, and then secondly, to report it as necessary. So we have policies with regards to the use of body-worn cameras. The requirements that our officers have, and there's a whole policy that we have written out, that the minute they walk out of a station, they have to have the cameras in standby mode. If that is the expectation of the organization, and it is, and an officer sees his or her partner not doing that, then yes, they have a responsibility to tell him, hey, partner, activate your camera, put it in standby mode. And if that person refuses to do it, then they need to report it. And that is the expectation, that they will report it to a supervisor. It goes along one of the changes that we just implemented in our current use of force policy. There's always the expectation that officers, if they become aware of misconduct, that they report it, right? And that's always been there. But this is something that we need to keep preaching. This is something that we need to keep reiterating over and over again. And in our current use of force policy, there's actually a requirement that we've just instituted into our policy that requires not just in the event an officer sees his or her partner engage in excessive force, they have to not only report it, but the new thing is what we've just put into our policy is that they have to intercede and stop it. They just can't stand by there and watch it and then report it. They have a responsibility when practicable, and again, officer safety being an issue, to stop it. And I think the same thing goes, whether it's this or with any other department violation of department policy. Yes, the expectation is stop it and report it.
My question a little bit more beyond expectation.
I think that was one of the things that most people, especially myself, were the most upset about in the George Floyd situation.
Absolutely. There is a penalty,
there was a
but
police
failure to
being a
report
jackass
absolutely
and doing something he shouldn't have done. But then there were three other police officers that just stood by and let it happen and didn't intervene.
That is in place.
And I think that's the point that we're trying to get to when it talks about accountability. It's your duty to intercede when you see someone doing the wrong thing. And if that honor code, if you will, had been in place in Minneapolis, George Floyd would be alive today.
And and just to add on to that, just real quick, we had a situation just before the George Floyd incident, without going into much detail and identifying individuals. We had a situation in one of our divisions, at one of our areas here in the city, where an officer engaged in excessive force, and it was widely televised. And the officer engaged in excessive force with an individual that he had in custody in handcuffs. And the partner, based on the body-worn video and other recordings, the partner stood there. It appears as if she was in awe, just taken by surprise. But we initially, not only did the officer who was involved in the excessive force, not only was that individual relieved of duty immediately, pending a personal complaint investigation, but so was the partner. I mean, and someone could say, well, she was just shocked. Well, that might be true, but we spend a lot of money training police officers, giving expectations, what we expect them to do, not to stand there shocked at what they're seeing, but to take appropriate action. So absolutely.
Thanks, John. If I could just jump in there. New Orleans Police Department adopted a policy or a program called EPIC, Ethical Policing is Courageous. And it was started by a former member of Civilian Oversight, a lawyer who used to sue the New Orleans Police Department numerous times, and a former member of law enforcement. And what it was based on was bystander intervention. And they looked at, why didn't, throughout wars and all kinds of issues. Why didn't bystanders intervene? And they started working on the psychology of that, and they created this program. If you look at Georgetown Law School is going to have some training about it in the next month. And again, that's Georgetown Law School, is about EPIC, and ethical policing is courageous, and bystander intervention into that. So I wholeheartedly agree that folks should be held accountable the same administratively and criminally. But also, this program is run by officers for officers and gives them permission
No,
to
that's great
speak
to
up.
know. And I mean,
You could
that's part
see
of
in
what
that
we're
George
trying to do
Floyd's
here is a lot,
incident, and it
there's a
happens all
lot
over
of
the
great
country
things going on in the country
policing.
that no one hears
Officers don't want
about.
to second guess each
And
other.
hopefully this
And
program and
so
this
this gives them
effort will
permission to
bring
not
those
just second
things to
guess, but to
light.
go ahead
So
and stop them as
we
well.
know there's
So I
common
just
ground
wanted to
out
give
there, and we know
our
there's
police department some credit
great
for adopting that.
things going on, and that's why I dig and search for guys like Tarek and yourself and everybody else to be on these calls so that people can hear great stuff, and also, you know, we can discuss where we differ and go on. So I don't know, Tarek, if you have anything to add.
No, I think they're absolutely spot on in what they're saying. You know, research shows us that body-worn cameras do not build trust. Body-worn cameras do not build trust. People build trust. And absent that, like Horace talked about earlier, it's more important for me as a police administrator to ensure that number one, officers are turning their cameras on when they should, but also that there is accountability through a management process as we review use of force incidents. So, for example, you know, when an officer uses force, each supervisor at that through that chain of command has to review that force through body-worn cameras, and that's where we identify at times that all officers that were on scene, if their cameras were operational or not. And then if there was an officer whose camera was not operational, then we look into it and we address it, and that could result in some type of disciplinary action. So I think it's very important to ensure that you have policies in place that are implemented to guide officers in what you want them to do. And at the end of the day, there are various reasons at times the cameras may not be operable. It may be due to technology. It may be due to how quick an incident unfolded and happened. But ultimately, if they are not following policy, it's up to the supervisors to hold them accountable and have a process in place to do that. And then absent that, I think it's also important that every police department has a duty to intervene policy and a duty to report misconduct. Again, as I stated earlier, if we have officers that are not representing what we believe that the oath means, then they don't need to police anymore. And that's simple, fair, and true. And I think that as we saw the progressiveness of law enforcement and policing since the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing, you've seen more police chiefs across this nation stand in front of the camera and speak about police misconduct and fire officers.
No, and that's a great point. We talk
we've had
about
incidents in Arlington where we've done it,
police
and I think you've seen
accountability
it across the
platform.
country.
We talk
So
about technology.
they're absolutely
again,
spot
as a
on.
company that,
And I do
organization
believe
that
that
works on
you
technology
know, when we
and
look at
looking
technology
at
and
brain
how it's
health and things
advanced,
like
it's
that,
also
technology in
increased
terms
levels
of
of
simulation
accountability in
and
policing.
computer programs. I know Dave from Will Interactive was on the call earlier, but I think he had to drop off. But there's some great technology things, and we're going to try to showcase some of that in November and actually have the kids participate in those simulations so they can understand what it's like to be a police officer and the decisions they have to make. We played around a little bit with it in Colorado Springs, and it was quite fascinating. You know, like we talk about walk a mile in someone's shoes. I think it's great for people to understand just how difficult a job it is to be a police officer and the stress that's involved, especially when you're responding to some of these complex situations. Before we run out of too much time, I want to talk about data real quick because it's been something that was brought up, and we had a conversation, Tarek, and we'll start with you, and then I'll throw it to Susan and Horace. We talked about, at the end of the day, everybody wants to go home to their family. Cop wants to go home to their family, and the citizen wants to go home, or you know, they might end up in jail, but they want to go someplace. everybody wants to walk away clean. And so as we look at the number of times a police officer draws their weapon in this country, do you think it would be useful to have a national database where you can record every time a police officer draws their weapon, why they drew it, what the circumstances were? We don't necessarily have to identify the officer, but just try to keep a database of every time someone draws their weapon and use that for training so that we can reduce the number of times that police draw their weapon. What do you think about that?
So this goes back into the conversation about ensuring that there is a national standard for policing. And it also ties into the conversation that we faced back in 2015, 2016, where the Washington Post came out with a self-reporting system as related to officer-involved shootings. There is no national standard for police use of force reporting. The FBI, Federal Bureau of Investigations, is who annually we report crime to, but also should have some type of national use of force standard on reporting. They've started that, but still it's not mandatory. And every police department does not report all of their information. And the reason for that is it's not consistent. So for example, as you pointed out, there are some major city police departments, if an officer draws their weapon, that may not be documented as a use of force. If an officer draws their weapon and responds to a person and points it at them, that may not be documented as a use of force. My organization does document those as a use of force, but again, it's not a consistent standard. So how do we measure data through accountability when there's not consistency in data? And then I think that it puts a police department in a better place to tell their story behind just historical narratives and officers' actions to either justify it or not justify it in many cases. So I think that when you talk about police data, there needs to be more data recorded. I think that it's important that the metrics of that data is identified, and then it's accessible to the public. During the Task Force on 21st Century Policing, there was an initiative called PDI, which was a public data initiative that said that, hey, we're going to make policies available online. And again, we still face challenges with there being consistency on that. So when you talk about ensuring that there's consistency in data and reporting, in my opinion, that's where the national standardization of law enforcement comes into place, where these things are mandated and we have a uniform standard across the board.
I totally agree with a lot of the comments made by Tariq. I think we do need to have that national standard, right? Because it makes no sense to have one agency reporting one thing, another agency reporting something else, and there's no consistency in terms of what it means. I think I have no problems at all with regard to mandating the data. We as an organization, we keep records and numbers of every time an officer withdraws his or her weapon in terms of when it's reported as part of the categorical use of force. What we don't do is track when an officer just his or her weapon and it's not part of the categorical use of force. So if there's a movement afoot to track that information, I don't have any problems at all with that. What we just incorporated into our new use of force policy is that not only are we going to track when the officer or weapon as part of a reportable use of force, but even when they pull it and point it at someone, because not every time you point your weapon at someone right now is that considered a use of force in the LFPD. We just implemented that policy. So now to add another component to that now, where it would be not just when you point it at someone, but just the fact that you can pull it. Because keep in mind, there are a lot of cases where an officer may be walking up on a traffic stop or get into a situation where they withdraw their weapon, but it's not pointed at someone. Okay, they just withdraw because of what the circumstances are dictating. Right now, that is not a reportable use of force. My concern, again, so we're not necessarily opposed to that. My only concern is something that we keep in mind, and that is going to be that when we start collecting this kind of data, even the data where an officer happens to pull his or her firearm and have it at their side, when we collect this kind of data, it's important. My concern would
Well,
be
no,
when
you
we
need
have
the
this data
context, because
with no
that's how the
context.
training and preparation
And I guess
come into
that's what
play.
you
So you
referred to, John,
understand
when you said
why
there's a
people are
reasoning
drawing their
behind why
weapon, and you
that weapon
start
was
collecting
pulled.
that
So
data, you start
somehow,
seeing
if we can
patterns
collect
will
the data
develop,
and then
and
put it
then you
into
can
context in
create
terms of the
training
reasoning,
from that,
I think that
so
would be
that
great.
maybe,
Danger would be
because
we
let's face
collect
it,
it
you're
and
not
there's no
going to shoot
context
your
put
weapon
there.
if you don't pull it. So let's start from the the most basic level. All of us that graduated from geometry, as you're solving the theorem, it's a progression, and so how can you start at the base level? And if we can reduce the number of times police draw their weapon, we're going to reduce the number of times that an unfortunate incident's going to take place. And ultimately, that's what we want, right? Go ahead, Susan.
Correct.
Agreed. I agree with what both of those two gentlemen just said. Pulling in your weapon in New Orleans is not a reportable use of force, but pointing at somebody is. And that has brought us, and as you just talked about, John, a lot of insight into what situation, in which situation officers are pulling their weapon. And it's very interesting. So it's helped them in their training. They now do more of a robust review uh, or debriefing of use of force incidents, and then are able to do better, create better training from that. So I think it's super important to do that. And we're going to take it one step further. We know Congress brought up this issue of a national database, but it did not pass it. But we're going to do that here in New Orleans. And I think before the end of the year, we'll have somebody in place who's putting it together, reporting on just these types of things, uses of force or any misconduct, and some narrative or gist in there so that we'll put it more into context as to what occurred in these particular incidents. In Louisiana, all of these issues are public records, so identifying officers is doable here. And so it will be linked at least to an officer or an employee number of some sort, so that people can see, as we found out in Derek Chauvin's case, he had a large use of force history. Well, prior to NOPD getting into a consent decree, there were many officers with way more complaints than Chauvin had, and way more deadly uses of force than
No,
what
I
he
think
had.
community
So,
has to be part of
and
the
no
accountability, and I
accountability
think
for that.
transparency
So
is
it's super
anytime you're
important
talking
that
about
we
accountability,
recognize the lessons of
transparency
the
comes hand in
past
hand with that.
and report those things going forward, and are transparent about it. And I think it helps officers as well to, when the community is also a part of the accountability.
John, if you don't mind, I just want to make sure I was clear on something. So when I talk about use of force reporting, consistent with what Horace was saying, I'm speaking
No, and I understand
about
that, but I'm
drawing your
saying if you're going
firearm
to collect
and
data,
or
let's collect
pointing it
data
as it
every time
relates
they
to
pull
a
their
threat
weapon, even if
or
it's
a
for
subject.
something
So
like they're searching
officers
a
search
building, that you
buildings
can still use that
with their
information and
firearms
that
out as
data
they
for
are
better
trained. I
training
don't think that
for how you search
constitutes the
buildings
use
in
of
the
force. So I
future. That's
just
all.
want
I'm not
to
suggesting
be
that we shouldn't.
clear on that. So
Whether or not you should draw or not draw your weapon to search a building, that's something that we can train for. What I'm suggesting is if you're going to create a national database, it should have every time you pull the weapon. That's all I'm saying. And then another thing that we talked about is almost every industrialized country in the world has a national police force. The United States does not. There's several reasons for that. Obviously, most of that's because of the founding fathers and the way they set up the country as a representative republic. But I know, like we tried to get Senator Tim Scott and Representative Karen Bass to come on to the town hall today, and they had, by the time I got to the right people, it was too late. But we're going to try to schedule them in the future so we can talk about the legislation that they're both championing, whether it's in the House or the Senate, and how we can create, rather than talk about police reform, I think we should elevate the discussion into national accountability and national standards that all police departments should at a minimum level. If you want to do more than the national standard, that's great, but there should be at least a national standard.
Great. And we agree with that. And you need that data to make these decisions. So for instance, how often are police using force against those with mental illness? That's super important to figure out what are those situations? When do those occur? And which number of those situations can we now shift to mental health providers, right? In which they'll be safe and be able to react to those situations in a non-policing manner. And so same thing with children. How much is over-policing of children, and can we use other resources to deal with children as opposed to having police do all of that? Somebody put in the chat, can somebody talk about police having to do everything? Well, yeah, I think that's part of the conversation right now. When you hear people talking about defund, I think most of the defund conversation is about moving chunks of what police respond to away from them and letting them deal with the folks who are hurting others.
And Susan, I think that's a very key point, because when you talk about defunding the police, I mean, a lot of people have a different various definitions as it relates to that. I don't believe that you should take funding, and what I mean by that, financial funding, away from the police. I've shared with other people, when you look at the majority of police budgets, it's personnel and benefits, and then you have the part of the budget that's operational. But absent that, I think it's incumbent, again, for us to follow science and then pilot different things so we can know if they are effective or if they're not effective. A lot of times we look at use of force as something negative, but we have gone through an immense amount of training over the last 5 years. And so when you talk about data that matters to me as well, I think when you look at these situations, how do we know that de-escalation training is working? When we look at a lot of these cases that could have ended up in some type of use of force, we have cops that are actively de-escalating the situations, and we don't have any data on that or recorded on that could have ended up in some type of use of force. Even mental health calls. Believe me, if we could take mental health calls off the table for law enforcement, I fully support that. But there are other large police departments that have preventative mental health programs where they work in concert with mental health providers to ensure preventative care, to ensure that we don't respond to those calls for service. So, one department that is great, a great example, San Antonio Police Department. They have 2 officers that are non-uniform officers that do preventative interaction, that are trained first responders as it relates to mental health. So again, I truly believe that as we make these decisions,
I think the more
we need to ensure that we're following the science and what research states, so we can substantiate them, just as we're talking about the use of force.
Why can't we use that information? Because it'll make our police better. Horace, I don't know if you have anything else you want to add on that.
Agreed.
No, I agree with the points. And I totally agree that we need to be looking at data. That is the way.
No, and that's where that's why we have the ABCs.
Looking at this whole concept
accountability,
of
better
data
preparation,
analytics,
and community engagement. I mean, you got to have
the only
all
caveat
three.
that I would have is that we don't allow data to take us away from that crux of policing, which is
the better preparation part. How do you use technology?
Right.
How do you use data? How do you use those things to create better training, better preparation for doing their job, and then have accountability standards so people are held accountable, and then have that community engagement. Do your police officers know their community? I know you guys at LAPD do a lot of work in that area, and especially since the Rodney King riots, has really improved a lot. And how you use the faith community. Unfortunately, Alveda had to leave, but how the faith community plays a role in that community engagement is important as well.
I totally agree with what Horace just said. And, and even though it's my job to critique the police and monitor and oversee and do that type of stuff, when I walk my neighborhood with my dog and I see police officers in the neighborhood, I love it when they'll stop and just say hi. Now, I know that they're busy, and they're going from call to call, but when they have a minute to just stop and say hi, it shows me something about their heart, right?
Did
That
you have
they
something
want
you
to
wanted to add,
engage
Boyd?
me in a different way. Instead of just policing me, they want to engage me in a different way. And so I totally agree with that. It's a tough job, but when they, can relate to somebody person to person, it's great.
I sure did. In closing thoughts on my end, the way I view accountability and what's happening here now, we have two sides. We have the community, we have law enforcement, and one side doesn't believe the other's policing themselves, and so they have anger towards them and distrust. And then the other side thinks that everybody despises them and hates them, so they go at them fueled already. And it's a chicken for the egg, or the egg, which came first. Who's going to give in and believe that the other side is policing themselves first? My gut is that it's going to take law enforcement, because they can pass policies and administratively do it, to ensure that we're going to have police policing themselves. The hope is that the community will believe and trust, because they will actually be policing themselves, and then they'll start policing themselves. The idea with approaching this is what's real in our minds is real. And
Thanks, Boyd.
remembering that, I really think that's going to help open up.
Does anybody
through our
have any
retreats, through these
questions
calls,
from the
through
audience?
hearing the other people's perspectives, that walk in shoes different than our own.
If you want to make
I
a
think that's what's
last
going to allow for this
comment, we have
breakthrough, if we
about
just
3
stay
minutes
at it
before we
and
hit
we have endurance.
the stop.
Thank
So I don't know if anybody has anything they want to add. Please go ahead, unmute yourself and make your comment.
Just want to say one last thing, if you don't mind. Number one, again, thank you for including us on this conversation, and I think it starts a vast network across the nation. So I appreciate it again. After the first night of protests in the city of Arlington, I had a so much better appreciation for officers greater than what I have every single day. I went to work at 8 o'clock that morning. I got home at 4 o'clock a.m. the next morning. And when I walked in the house and saw my family and they wrapped their arms around me, I just felt a sigh of relief. We have cops out here every single day working hard to protect the community, to respond to dangerous situations. And that should not be understated. This is a dangerous job. But the majority of this job is what Susan just talked about: speaking to people, meeting with people, caring for youth, every single thing that we've talked about today. And so I don't want us to lose that in the fact of national narratives and news lines. It's very important that we continue to have this type of critical dialogue and conversation to move the conversation forward. And so I'm committed to doing that.
Go ahead, Tyson.
I don't have as many years as Horace does yet. But it takes a collective body so we can do the work we need to do to make the next generation better. So thank you again, and thank everyone for everything you do for our communities.
Guys, again, thanks for having us, having USA Boxing on the call, and we're looking forward to working with you. One of my favorite Martin Luther King quotes is, we may have come here on different ships, but we're in the same boat now, right? So I want to compliment the law enforcement officers on here who are policing themselves and talking about policing the different members of the force, because it's just so important. And it's very difficult to do that. People don't realize how difficult it is to police your peers. And, we kind of had to do that on the board of directors here at USA Boxing, because we represent members. And just like, and we have to, we have to serve our members just like they're serving the community. So I really want to applaud you for what you're doing, the efforts in policing the force. It's always three phases of change. There's a period of chaos, a period of synthesis, and a period of stability. And I think the George Floyd killing really cracked something open in this country. And the reason I say that, I grew up in the South. I grew up in Southern Alabama with, and I have an interracial marriage with biracial children who had to grow up here. And just like the gentleman who spoke about his son who graduated from an Ivy League school, my oldest son went through public school and graduated from Harvard. So you can do it, right? But and then I grew up here, went to public school, went to West Point, then
Exactly.
ended up being the first Black president of USA Boxing Board of Directors in 131 years. So things are changing in this world and in this country. I hear you guys talking about data, and data is so important because data helps you identify trends, right? But then also, we have to remember. I heard Nick Saban came here and he spoke and he said something, and then I started thinking while everyone was talking, why did the George Floyd incident have so much impact? Well, everybody was home watching, right? And so Nick Saban had a quote. He said, People won't remember what you did and they won't remember what you said, but they'll remember how you made them feel, right? So take that data and use it to identify the trends. How does this tie into boxing? When you guys come visit the boxing gyms, I encourage you to come in uniform. Drive your cars there to the local boxing gym. Go in and see what the kids are doing. Because there's a thing, when the police come pulling up in the car, it's like, well, what happened? What happened? And you just got to get past that to the point to where I think people feel more and more comfortable. And you guys are making those efforts now and those strides, and I think that's great. So I want to encourage you to continue doing what you're doing. Thanks for having us on the call
just
today.
respect
And
for
we're
each
gonna do
other.
everything
I think
we
that's
can
the thing. I mean,
at USA Boxing
it's great.
and our gyms all across the 50 states
If
to help.
we had just a better
help make this thing
understanding of
happen,
respect for one another, no
and
matter
help
what we
us
look like,
work together.
because we know that
and-
Boyd is ugly,
and have the
and he's
respect
not going
that
to
we
get any
should for our
prettier
police
anytime
force. So
soon.
thanks so
So we
much.
have to have respect for him for that, And Coach Lev taught me a lot about how to deal with Boyd and respect Boyd and how that worked out. So I appreciate that, Coach, and we'll work that as a building block for the future.
Watch your mouth, save your teeth.
But great call, guys. I mean, this was a great call, and this is all about communication. And that's the only thing that's going to help us get through this and become better.
Mr. Leah, are you a Roll Tide fan or are you a War Eagle?
Well, seeing that I have a daughter who's a senior at Alabama, as well, so Roll Tide.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
All right,
I just wanted to make sure.
That's a good man back there.
All right. Well,
All right.
I would like to say, I just had two of my little JOs just come out here, and I told them I was on the conference call. They sit here for about 5 minutes because they wanted me to pan the camera around so they can say hi. I finally run them out of here so they can go train. But with that being said, John and Boyd and Lee and all the guys that was out here, great impact. And then now I have the kids that came in yesterday to training that didn't make it out this past weekend, and they were sick to the stomach. because they hear the stories in the gym about how much fun we had and how interactive you all were. So right there, it's a splash in the pool, but we know we're making ripples somewhere that eventually going to become waves. So thank you all. I really appreciate it. And the kids they're so adamant about when the next time we're going to have an event like that. And I'm all I say is, hey, I don't know, but
we got more to
definitely
come,
let you
and we
know.
have our debrief on Thursday.
Great
Coach,
impact
and,
right here
there's going to
in
be
Colorado
just
Springs.
an
That this is one
unbelievable
gym. So imagine how it's going to be
groundswell of
once
what'll
the
happen there in Colorado
group gets
Springs because of
bigger
what we
and the
built.
events getting bigger.
And we have the TV
It's going to be a
station,
great
and we
thing.
got
I'm excited.
Mark and the police group, and you and the kids and everything. All the dynamics are there, and we just want to try to replicate that in as many places, in many cities as we can. We have a great coalition we're building. There's some other people we're pulling in, and it's just going to keep snowballing. And our country's going to be. I mean, the one thing I think we all agree on is we all, as Americans, we love our country and we just want it to be better. Yeah, we're.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Tyson.
Well, guys, with that,
One last thing, program note, I posted the invitation for Friday
one more call,
for the Police Accountability Working Group.
And, Mike,
we have a
Mike
document that we're
McAfee's
putting
still on,
together.
and
I'll send that to you, Horace
available
and
for
Tarek,
whatever you need.
because you guys are
So,
relative,
thanks a
and
lot.
Susan too, because you weren't available. I didn't know about you guys before that, but I'll send that to you guys so you can take a look at it, and please add in or make whatever edits you want, and eventually we're going to get it to Senator Scott and Karen Bass and some others, and let's try to work with Andre and his group. And there's a great coalition here that we're building on, and it's going to just get better. So thank you all for participating. And any final words, Susan? Thank you. Horace, any final thoughts?
Amazing event. Love your platform. Amazing group. And thank you, John, for this invitation. I really enjoyed
it. I agree with Susan. It was just my honor to share this stage with all the folks here, Susan, Charles.
Excellent. Well, we're going to get a chance to work
Tariq.
together because we got November coming up, and I got to thank the Dodgers and the great work that they do in the community.
I miss
and the work
LAPD,
that we're going to
Chief.
try to do.
I miss the LAPD
COVID or no
Blues.
COVID, we're going to do something. I mean, we managed to figure it out in Colorado Springs, and so we'll be able to figure it out here. So, and then eventually, Tarek, we got to come to Texas. You're on mute though. You're practicing your Japanese monster movie. Well, I don't know if you can see. See if I can pan there. If you can see my background here.
Please do.
Can you see that?
Everything
Can you see
is
that,
bigger in
Tarek?
Texas. Doing the Dallas Cowboys.
That's why I always make fun of Lee. I said, how blessed can you be, 2-time Super Bowl champ, but you still got traded to Cleveland?
Oh, Lord.
I think he's off now. I think he had to
I
go.
got
Anyway,
you.
thank you all.
Go
It's been great.
Cowboys.
Another 2 hours goes by pretty fast, doesn't it? Thank you, guys.